welcome. Thanks for coming, everyone. These are our women. We worked with 45 refugee women this year. The Miss Average refugee woman, they're from Nuer background, Southern Sudan. Average woman, they live in Melbourne now, 4 children, 37 years old, has been in Australia for 7 years and was a refugee for 5 years before that. So, and half of them are single moms. So you can see their lives are busy, lots of stuff going on. This year, they went to school. They all decided that they were going to go to school. As a community, as a group, the community leader said, I just can't believe it. Everybody's going to school this year. It's an amazing thing. And I'd like to say we had some part in that, and I'll tell you why. We gave them mobile phones. And we taught them peer support. And we created a village. And with that village, the culture was a culture of growth, and they grew and went to school. So let me tell you about it a little bit. They're from Southern Sudan, a place that's been in the news lately. It's a new country. Maybe if they would have had the right accounting standards, they wouldn't have had quite so much war, famine, and the rest. But it's not been a good place to live for the past 10 years. They came to Australia as refugees. Now we're all African. We're all from Africa. But some of us left a few years later than others. Some of us have had more time to get used to the transition between Africa and here. For them, it's been kind of sudden. Get plopped out of Africa and dropped into Australia. And so that's sort of a tough gig, a tough thing to do. It's a big difference. It's a big geographic distance, and it's a huge cultural distance. There's differences in transportation, in cooking. You come to Australia, you got to learn how to use a stove and all these modern newfangled gadgets. Shopping, it's busy places, but a cash register is different than a market. So it's very strange here. It's very, very strange. You come to Australia, and we're a literate culture. People get off the plane and we give them a brochure and we say, this is how you do it. There's a bit of support and stuff, but if you want information in Australia, you get it in paper, you get it in English, you get it on the internet. That's the way that information comes to you if you live in Australia. That's the way we do it. It's kind of efficient, but it's not so useful for these guys. They're from a verbal culture. And the verbal they speak is a foreign language. It's not English. They're from a village culture. They're used to getting information over the back fence, not all these distance methods. And the information they need is incredible. They need so much information. And it's mundane information. It would be very hard for me to be a support person. I've tried, actually, and there's so many little things that you want to say, oh, no, don't do it that way. Oh, no, don't buy your mobile phone from that person. Oh, it's going to cost you so much money. There's so many mistakes to be made if you don't know how to work it, how to work the system. I came from Canada, really, it's so easy, I know exactly how to work the system here, but there's so many traps for refugees, and they've fallen into them, and it's painful. So it was actually, the solution was really easy. It was really easy. I had a friend, his name was Wako, James Wako. I was living with him, and he's from refugee background, he's from Nuer background, and he was always talking on the phone. He was talking on the phone at 5 in the morning, in the middle of the night. I'd chat with him for a half an hour, and he'd get 3 phone calls. This is a single guy. How could it be possible that he would have that many friends, that many relationships? And not only that, he had to pay credit for the phone. He had $30 worth of credit. He'd be run out of credit every 2 days. The story of his life was, I don't have any credit. How could that happen, that he would use the phone so much? Well, he's integrated into a social network of people who treat him as a resource. And he'd been there a little bit longer, he knew a little bit more English, people would call him up and get support from him. So I thought, well, heck, that's a great thing. And I can see that the phone is a good thing for him. Let's make it a little bit easier. And so it's really easy for me because I'm a phone geek. I love technology. I've loved technology for years, and for kind of the 3 years before I met Waco, I just play with phones. I call my parents for free in Canada. I've got you call my house, it says, "Hello, George. What can I do for you?" I love phones, and so I could tell that I could make his life easier with phones. So in Germany, they've got 1.5 phones per person. I think here is about 1.2. Why shouldn't African refugees have more than one phone? So that was the idea. Let's give them another mobile phone. The way the phone company works, they've got all these towers in place. The cost of a call on the network itself is pretty kind of free. You join up with 3, and it's a free free calling to other people in free. It doesn't really cost them anything. It's just moving electrons around. There's not much extra cost. So it's cheap. You can get cheap phone calls. The phones themselves are really cheap as well. So why not? Let's do something with that. So we got some money from Vic Health, and we gave out these phones. 120 phones to 120 refugees. They're restricted calling, so the phones can only call each other. That's how you keep the cost down. As well, so they get to call each other freely. They also can call 10 landline numbers. So we hooked up those landlines so they can call their local hospital, their local doctor, their schools. And then we had 5 landlines left, and we said, well, heck, let's hook up those landlines so they can call places in overseas. VoIP, 8 cents a call. So they were also able to call their friends and family in Canada and America, UK and stuff. So all that was $100 per person per year. Cheap. Imagine, we give refugees a refrigerator when they get off the boat, and that costs us $800. That's 8 years worth of phone calls in our program. The other thing we did is we taught them a bit of peer support. So that's take turns listening to each other, take turns, and sort of a way of increasing the intimacy. You may like your neighbors, but it's another thing to be able to rely on them, to be able to call them in the middle of the night. So the peer support was good for that. And so it worked. It worked beyond our wildest dreams. And so later on, as the time went on, as we got to know the refugees better, we got a picture of why it worked so well. So one reason is the social thing. So how many relatives do you have? How many cousins do you have? I can remember back 3 generations. I can remember my mother's name, my father's name, and my grandfather's name. I don't actually know my great-grandfather's name. The three generations back. How many generations can you remember? Some of you, I'll bet you can remember your great-grandfather's name. I was a bit deficient that way. So some of you are on the 4 scale. Anybody remember more than four grandparents back? If you've done a little genealogy, maybe. Our newer friends, they can remember 15 generations back. They can say, oh, my grandfather's 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 name was blah, 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 blah. And so when you know 15 generations back, you've got a lot of cousins. That's the Nuer family. That's the social burden, and that's the resource you've got, the social connectedness. So, how do we know it worked? Well, this is the social graph. This is the graph of 45 Nuer women. Each line is more than 20 calls in the last 6 months. More than 20 calls. Every one, the average degree is 10. So each person in that graph has got 10 people they called more than 20 times. There's a few people on the outliers, but it's a very, very dense graph. Our graph wouldn't look like that. Very well connected. They racked up 3,000 hours of talking, 43,000 calls. That's the numbers. What do they use it for? For the making calls in the middle of the night when you don't have anybody to talk to and you're feeling really sad about living in a very strange country. One of the women calls up her son in America, her grandson in America, and says, "Are you home from school? Tell me about your day." And then she calls up the mother and says, "Your son's home, he's doing okay." Another woman, she says, "Now I can fulfill my role." She's 70 years old. Now I can be the matriarch to this community. The women can call me up and say, "What should I do about my husband?" And I tell them to be nicer to him. I was a bit shocked, but really, that's what she wants to do. They're able to go out and be part of the world. What does a big fat business person do with their phone? Well, they do that too, because they have big fat lives. They've got to learn to live in Australia, to learn all these things, to transfer information back and to coordinate their lives. They do all that with their phone. They learn information about, if you buy things at the shop and you take it away right away, it costs a lot more than if you leave it there and pay it off as the time goes by. The difference between credit and lay-by. What a strange concept. And yet they had to figure that out and transfer the information through the community. And the peer support stuff. One little boy saying to his sister, "Don't bother mother now. You'll get your turn later." Learning to take turns and to communicate well. A fellow from Stanford University, B.J. Fogg, he says that the mobile phone is the ultimate persuasive technology because it's immediate, contextual, timely, and location specific. You can get support wherever you are. And it persuaded these women to go to school. That network created a culture of people deciding to go to school. We didn't say the word school once in all of our training. And they just thought, well, I want to grow. I want to live in Australia. This is who helped us out. A lot of people think it's a good idea. I think that my big idea is that every refugee, every disadvantaged immigrant who walks off the plane, we should hand them a phone and say, here's a community of people you can call. It's really good that you've got all these services. Services are great, but they just don't do the same thing as having a bunch of friends. And there's a lot of people at risk in our society. Homeless, isolated farmers, multicultural, same-sex attracted youth, people with chronic diseases. Give them phones. Why not? It's cheap. Give them community. That's my idea.